Hey everybody, it's Ty from K2 Data Science and Engineering. In this video, we're going to create our dashboard as a dynamic web application. I'll be using the Flask micro framework. If you are not familiar with Flask, it's a bare bones web development framework that lets you quickly create simple apps. In our case, we will simply be reading in our JSON data and displaying it in certain sections of the page. It will read similar to other Python code we have written, so you should be able to follow along. Now our Flask app is going to be quite simple. You'll see we simply have an app.py file. We also have a templates folder that has our index.html. That's the same index.html we had in the prior video, but we'll have some special syntax so we can pass variables from our app server to our HTML. Then we'll have a static folder that has our styles as well as the data files, so the JSON files that we exported from our Jupyter notebook. So let's walk through the app.py file and then we'll look at the index.html. So at the top, we just have a couple imports. We import OS and operator. Now OS we'll use to import the data files, and operator we'll use to sort the items. Then we're going to import some modules from Flask. So we're going to import Flask, render template, URL4, and JSON. Here we're just creating a new Flask app instance, and then we're defining our index route, and we just define the function index. So here we are setting our site root, so that allows us to set references to files within our folders. And then what we do here is we just join the path. So we take our site root and then we join it with static data and then the file stats.json. So you can see that's just us getting to this file. And then here we use the JSON package to load and open that reference to the file, and then we store in a variable stats. And we simply do the same thing for all the other JSON files. Like I mentioned before, you can combine everything into one JSON file. If this was a real application, you'd probably store in a database and query it, but I just kept the files separate. And then here we're just sorting the categories in descending order. The problem with exporting the counter to JSON is that it doesn't keep all the properties of that unique class, since JSON is a more universal format. So if we take a look at categories, it's actually not sorted by which one's the largest. So you can get around that if you used a more Python specific format like pickle, or if you were just using a database. So we do the same thing with authors. We give it the reference, we load the URL, and then we sort it, and then we do the same thing with weekdays. And then in the last line, the return for our function, we use the render template module, and then we are sending it index.html, and then we're passing these variables. So stats equals stats, so that means the stats variable here, you can access it in the template if you call stats. And then same with all the other ones. And then we just have a main block here. For the app run, debug equals true. We're just putting debug on because it allows us to save changes and then simply refresh the browser. If you don't have debug mode on, then you actually have to quit the server and restart the server anytime you make a change. We can quickly take a look at the index file. So roughly all the same code. There are some differences. For example, here we had a relative path. We just had styles.css, but here we have to use URL4, and we combine static with file name styles.css. And that's just how Flask references local files. And then you can see we have these two braces, open and close, and this is how we access variables. So remember, we passed the stats variable, which is really just a dictionary with two key value pairs. And so we can extract out stats num articles just as we would with Python. And the same we do with reading time and so forth. Here we're going to export the categories. Now Flask uses a special type of templating language. It's called Jenga, and it allows you to do some logic, use some Python code, and here you can see we're doing a for loop. And we have the end of our for loop, and we're just taking the top 10 categories, and then we're capitalizing, and then we're putting out the key value. So we're capitalizing the category title, and then we're putting a dash, and then we're printing out the number of times there were articles in that category. You can see we do the same thing with authors. And then our last row is a weekday frequency chart. You can see roughly all the code is the same. The only difference here is we have the labels, which we had before, but for our data, this is what I mentioned earlier. You have to have some manual code because the weekdays aren't ordered. We have to reference each item in the dictionary. So we have weekdays Monday, weekdays Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and that gets us the correct value. Now if we want to run this, we can just go to the local file. We can just type in python app.py. It's going to run on this address. If we just copy that, put that in a web browser, we can see the blog analytics. So we have our correct article count of the blog, and then we have the average reading time in minutes, the top 10 categories, the top 10 authors, then we have our graph, weekday frequency. And these are the correct values from our data set. That's it for this video. In the next video, we'll use Heroku to deploy our application to the cloud.